Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Kinsler, and I am a staff attorney at the Texas Children's Commission. On behalf of the Children's Commission, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Ties That Bind Supporting Kinship Care. This webinar will explore practical and legal strategies for promoting positive connections through kinship care. The webinar will address unique considerations for informal and formal kinship caregivers, such as identifying legal, financial, and mental health barriers, improving communication, navigating safety plans, bridging service gaps, and accessing resources. For those watching the live presentation, the Q&A feature is available for this webinar, and questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation if time allows. Additionally, the MCLE course number will be provided at the end of the presentation. If you are watching the webinar replay, you may email cctran@txcourts.gov for MCLE self-reporting information. Again, you may email cctraing@txcourts.gov. This presentation will be moderated by the Honorable Judge Stephani Logue of the North Texas Child Protection Court. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Judge Logue, to say a few words and introduce you to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin our introductions, I want to acknowledge the importance of kinship care. Kinship care is important because it allows children who cannot safely remain with their parents to remain within their family network, preserving vital connections. Children in kinship care often experience greater stability, continuity, and stronger sense of identity, which supports their emotional and social development. Kinship caregivers can also help parents access services, maintain connections, which supports the children's emotional and social development. Kinship caregivers are very vital in helping to maintain family reunification while helping child welfare systems provide cost-effective supportive placements. Overall, kinship care promotes safety, stability, and long-term positive outcomes for the children and the families. With that said, I would like to introduce you to the panelists and have them share a little bit about themselves, beginning with Nicole Love.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Love, and I am the staff attorney for the Kincare project at Texas Legal Services Center. I've been there since January of 2024 when we started this project. We work mostly with informal kinship caregivers. Before that, I represented parents and kids part-time on TLSC's Family Helpline before I moved into the Kincare attorney role.
Thank you. Kelly Elrod.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Elrod. I am a Kinship Navigator with ACH Child and Family Services. We support kinship families of all types, grandparents raising grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nephews, siblings, you name it, offering them a wraparound service of support. And I too was a kinship provider here in the state of Texas.
Thank you. Thank you both for those introductions. Let's dive right in. What does the kin first ideal mean to each of you in your professional roles? And why is it so vital for children in kinship care? Many kinship arrangements begin informally out of an immediate family crisis and may or may not have some child welfare agency intervention. Kelly, can you describe a common initial situation you encounter and the first legal hurdle the family faces?
Absolutely. Our families, like I said, it's a lot of times it's informal placements, grandmothers raising grandchildren, grandparents trying to support grandchildren on a limited income. Lots of time they are living on SSI, so they don't necessarily qualify for any kind of legal services for free. And they don't really have the means or the funding to afford an attorney to intervene for them in their behalf. So that's, again, what we really try to strive to maintain and to work with them on, giving them those resources, helping them along the way. In our situation, we have several stories that are hard to navigate, but they're there and they're real. For instance, we do have a family that they have a kiddo with some severe mental health challenges and needing that mental health to be looked at and to be addressed. And they cannot do that without that conservatorship, and that legal hurdle stands in our way oftentimes.
What is the most common reason a family will first reach out to you in your program?
I think a lot of times kinship caregivers really reach out to us when they hit a almost like a wall of frustration. They're looking for answers. They're looking for someone to stand beside them. They're looking for a team of support. A lot of times it's even community partners will refer them to us. So I think at that point, they're just looking for someone to say, I understand, and it's not easy, but we can get through this.
What is the biggest misconception regarding the support your program can offer?
The biggest misconception that our program would get is that we are legal. We are a legal team, and because we're not, we're just here to walk beside them and to navigate and to guide them. I think another big misconception that our program receives is that we are part of the child welfare system, meaning we can make those kinship payments happen, or we can give them what a foster parent or a kinship foster parent would receive.
Thank you. Nicole, what are the major legal obstacles and misconceptions that you see for kinship givers, particularly those in informal arrangements?
Well, again, our project is there to help navigate some of those legal and systemic barriers. I think the biggest legal obstacle and misconception of a lot of folks is not understanding their legal status. So they don't understand what rights they have, whether or not they have decision-making ability, what options they might have. And then because that part is really vital in understanding what resources someone might have access to, what benefits. It can cause housing problems, childcare issues, the ability to enroll in school or get medical help might be affected. And I say that obstacle is almost like a big boulder. And if it starts to roll down the hill, it can just cause a lot of issues. So I think that is one of the biggest legal obstacles. I get a lot of folks that come with maybe a safety plan or a PCSP or even some sort of informal power of attorney, or even sometimes those signed authorizations for non-parent care. And they tell me, well, I have legal custody, or I have legal guardianship, or I have temporary guardianship or custody. And I have to spend a large portion of my time explaining why that isn't the case. So I think that's difficult for them to understand. And that's a big part of what I do, is just that education part of it. They also have challenges financially and accessing legal services because there just isn't a lot available, and just navigating those multiple systems.
Can someone in your role help overcome those challenges?
Sure. Well, I think just giving the education about things like what legal status you have and what that means for you and what that means for your ability to do things for that child is a big one. Just talking about then what legal issues and options might be available. I also do a lot of talking about resources and benefits that maybe they didn't even know existed. So I think just helping understand the process itself and dealing with those particular issues is really helpful, as well as being able to help them with getting things like those authorizations, those court-ordered authorizations, you know, assisting with those benefits navigations or appeals of those benefit denials, talking a lot about school issues and things like that. So we just kind of do a wide variety of things. The custody issues are still really big, but at this point, especially with the changes in the laws, um, there's not, we just do a lot of agreed things and not, we just don't really have the abilities too much to get into those contested cases.
Thank you. Kelly, for families and kin that enter the formal system, what barriers do you encounter and what do you think makes the process more difficult for our kinship caregivers?
We honestly, in my program, we don't see a whole lot of formal placements. But when we do, the biggest barriers I would see with them is understanding the process, understanding what the permanency worker is doing, understanding what their role as a kinship caregiver is, understanding what reunification looks like, the goal of family first, the goal of what is best for the child's welfare. I would love to see organizations be able to come together, to partner together so that these families can team together and bridge together with the agencies, with the bio parents and with the caregivers, and really form an overall tribe, if you will, of people to support what's best for everyone involved.
And is this a part of your program specifically that can help overcome these barriers or kind of be a gateway?
We absolutely try. We work closely with OCOK. We work with their specialist over there. We really try to get the communication, the education to the caregivers. We don't work a lot with the bio parents. We don't have much interaction with them. So really it's giving that caregiver the support, the education, and the resources of where to go and how to ask those questions so that they can advocate for themselves, for that child, and for what's best long-term.
Thank you. Nicole, let me ask you the same question. What are the barriers that you see that make the process so difficult for families and kinship that enter the formal system?
Again, I'm with Kelly in that I think just that lack of understanding of what the process is, what their roles are, what the goals of that case are. I think sometimes they feel like they don't have a voice in the system. There's really no training or help really to support them or help them understand how best they can support the parents. I think a barrier is there's no explanation a lot of times of why they might need to go get verified or get licensed, because those things are really intrusive and time consuming. And from what I've heard people say is that they don't really, no one ever explains to them what the benefits of that might be and maybe why that's important to an end goal that might not be reunification. So I think that those just communication and explaining about what's happening, as well as not enough help with resources. I still hear about, fights to get therapy, fights to get childcare, fights to get respite care. And then, there's that fear and that mistrust already of the agency itself. And then if they think or get the feeling that they're not doing something that they should be doing or getting too involved, then there's that fear that those children might be taken from them.
And I think that's a great question, and I'd like to delve a little bit deeper. Have recent changes in policies or formal foster care often have those, what recent changes in policies have addressed those issues? And especially with the privatization and things along those lines, have you seen a change for the good or to the detriment of kinship care?
Since I don't really deal with a lot of formal care, but I can't really speak to that so much in the last year and a half or 2 years. But prior to that, I think there were some good things and there were some bad things about the privatization aspect of it. I think the relaxing of some of the verification qualifications is going to help or has helped. I think the focus on diligent searches has been really, really helpful. And so I think that there are some strides that are being made toward help for those issues.
Do you think the legal system can be more flexible and responsive to the needs of kinship caregivers?
I think one is asking caregivers from day one, what do you need? I think that happens a lot with licensed foster care placements, but I don't know that that happens with other kinship caregivers. I think fast tracking that verification or those licensing procedures would really be helpful. I think just simply being communicative and fully transparent from the beginning would really help everybody understand the process, what the goals are. It not only helps the parent, but it helps the caregiver know maybe what they should be doing. And I think a lot of times it's not fully explained from the beginning. I think there needs to be a less adversarial mentality, perhaps, and a more collaborative mentality on how we can maintain these placements. What do they need? How can we help them keep these kiddos and hopefully reunify with the parents? How can everybody help support the parents? And there needs to be an increase in flexibility and creativity and help and training and education. I think all of those things can really be helpful.
Both of you have talked on this a little bit about the financial inequality and how so many of our kinship caregivers are on a fixed income or in an older grandparent role. Kelly, informal kinship caregivers often receive less financial support than a formal kinship caregiver. What issues does that cause for both the caregiver and the child?
Unfortunately, it causes a lot for both caregiver and child. Like you said, a lot of times they're on a fixed income. Even if they're not on a fixed income, most households are built on a budget, and that budget didn't allow at that given time for an extra placement or 4 or 5 placements at that time. We have caregivers all the time that have to contemplate quitting their job because they don't have access to child care management systems. So they don't get CCMS to pay daycare. So it's, do I keep my job and pay daycare, or do I quit my job and keep the child at home? A lot of times it's that legal of, I can't afford a retaining fee to an attorney. So now we are really pounding the pavement, trying to find pro bono, low bono attorneys. We're using grants that we've been gifted. And I say gifted because it is a huge gift when that happens, where we can go in and provide and offset some of that cost. These families don't get kinship payments like a foster family or like a kinship foster family. They don't get kinship payments. They don't get reimbursement for clothing vouchers. They don't get food support. So we're really, as an organization, connecting them with community resources of food banks, foster closets, local churches and organizations. Again, those pro bono attorneys, low bono attorneys, people like Nicole, where we're trying, if they can qualify on income, doing that pro se work and trying to get them what they need. I would say the biggest challenge and the most heartbreaking one is when they don't have the financial ability to make things happen quickly, and a child is in a mental health crisis, and now they cannot get that care and they cannot be seen. because they don't have that legal paperwork to make that happen. And I think that is just devastating, because the longer we prolong treatment, the worse it is for everyone involved. So I would love to see how we could bridge that together at some point, because these caregivers, they've stepped up, and they're keeping these kids out of foster care. They're keeping it's less traumatic on these kiddos. They're doing a justice, and they're hats off to the caregivers, seriously, because they've really stepped up in a hard time.
Kelly, do you see any other resource gaps?
When I see resource gaps again, legal, Medicaid, getting that Medicaid, we have battles with getting that Medicaid. A lot of times they don't qualify for SNAP benefits. Educational needs, daycare needs. Sometimes it's just basic clothing needs of laundry soap, and school's coming and it's getting cooler outside, and I need coats and jackets for these kiddos. Really all around care.
Thank you. Nicole, do you see any legal reasons for this disparity between formal kinship and informal kinship?
Well, I think Kelly brought that up, in that for informal caregivers, they just don't get a lot of the benefits or the resources that formal caregivers get when they're in that system. They also, of course, don't get the case management like they would, or the court oversight to make sure that things happen, which can be difficult. Kinship navigators are wonderful. I wish there were more of them so that we could help these informal caregivers more with that. We try to help them navigate some of that. Some of it is just simply a lack of authorization. A lot of times it happens too because investigations might be closed, and the case worker, the case investigator didn't ask for an authorization. They didn't ask for identification documents. So if these kids get left with the caregiver who doesn't have any of that, it can make things really difficult, like Kelly said. I think a lot of it is education too. When you're in that formal system, you have people that are helping you navigate through those processes of getting what you need for support. When you're an informal, you don't necessarily know what's available to you. I don't think, even with some of the calls I get, I'm not even sure that some of these, the people that work within the agencies are that familiar with, someone who's in this caregiving position, to know that, hey, maybe custody is not needed. Maybe I don't have to have this particular paper. For school, McKinney-Vento might be a way to get these kids into school. So I think just that, lack of ability to just get the information. And again, like Kelly said too, just the lack of ability to get to the legal resources that could even help them get, those authorizations, or those court-ordered authorizations, or just talk to them about what options. I think a lot of times they are told by various and sundry people, well, just go get orders. Just go get orders. And it's not quite as simple as that.
What do you think from legal avenues need to open or change in order to kind of equalize the kinship versus informal kinship in a legal system?
And so I guess in a legal system, I just think that there needs to be more access, number one, to even the ability to get information or advice. I mean, there's access on things like Texas Law Help, through the law libraries, things like that. But I think if you're talking to somebody one-on-one, that's really helpful. I think, if you have someone who is assisting, perhaps, with like in CPS, making sure that they get those authorizations before they close out that investigation. That would be, something that would be really helpful, or just making sure that's, those identification documents are available or they have what they need. And sometimes it's just knowing how to navigate to the different legal resources that are there.
I know we've talked a lot about the financial aspect of informal kinship, but there's often other struggles that come with that, such as emotional and psychological issues. Kelly, can you give us an example that you've worked with in your role as a kinship navigator?
Absolutely. And one of my past caregivers that comes to mind was exactly that. Legal was part of it because without that conservatorship, we were not able to navigate the mental health side of it and get the child the need that he needed at the time. This poor baby had experienced a lot of trauma. He was informally placed with this caregiver to the point where he was trying to jump out of moving vehicles. And that caregiver was calling, doing everything they could, seriously just begging to get this baby some help and some relief from that over emotional state that he was in. And I think that is a big thing with informal care is we don't have, as our program or as someone who advocates for someone in informal care, we don't have direct access to RTC placements. We don't have direct access to a lot of these mental health providers that the state does. And so it's navigating, it's getting into them, it's getting on the phone with them, and it's getting that conservatorship so that caregiver is able to make those decisions. Lots of times, even the power of attorney, we get turned away with that. If we even have the power of attorney, we get turned away with that.
What is your kinship navigation perspective on how can your role help with family reunification specifically?
I think with family reunification, I think again, it's educating that caregiver. It's letting them know and I tell my caregivers all the time, what's best for you, what's best for the child, and what's best for everyone together. Let's be real. Most grandparents don't want to be parents again. They want reunification. They want retirement. And I tell them all the time, it is okay to want to be just a grandparent. It is okay to want to be just the aunt. So how are we going to get there? What kind of support systems do we have to put in place for you? If it's counseling, if it's peer groups, if it's, caregiver support groups, what does the parent need? What kind of resources can I push your way? Do I necessarily work with a bio parent? No, but I know some resources in the area that I can hand off to you. So what does that parent need? And what does the child need? What is best for the child? How is that child going to migrate back to bio parent or between caregiver? I think it's great when it's more visitation that's not overseen by the caregiver. I think that is a hard role for the caregiver to take on when they have to step back and decide if this is a safe location or not. So I truly believe an outside organization is best for that. And I do refer a lot of them to professionals for that. Talk to a professional. Talk to someone who can help navigate that role, and then trying to find that person and putting them in contact with them.
And what entities does a kinship navigator actually work for or with? Are you working with CPS? Are you working with the child placing agency? You said you don't have a lot of contact with the parents, but are you also working with the child's attorney? Who are you actually working with, and how do you navigate all of those different roles that are involved in a
Right.
child
Honestly,
protective case?
Anyone I can talk to. I have been known to call an investigator and talk to the investigator. I've been known to call her supervisor and talk to her supervisor. I've been known to call the ICPC worker and say, help me understand, what are we thinking here? Why are we going this route? What can we do? I've been known to talk to the ad litem attorneys and say, okay, where are we? What do we need to do? So as I tell my caregivers all the time, there's nothing off the table. I will advocate, I will talk with you, beside you, guide you, and let's try to bridge these organizations together and see what we can do. And that's one thing I do like about having more private organizations involved, because OCOK can be a lot easier for me to get a hold of, to ask a permanency specialist or a kinship connection supervisor where we're going with this. So in all honesty, we are there talking to anyone and everyone.
Thank you. And Nicole, what is your perspective from your legal representation of both children and parents over the years about the dynamics of reunification and when you have different types of kinship placements and parents involved?
I think a lot of that comes first from understanding all of those family dynamics. There's grief from all sides. There's sadness, there's anger, there's fear, there's trauma. And I think, the best situations come from all of those, involved, from the child to the parent to the caregiver, being able to express themselves and maybe taking away the judgment factor. I wish there was more family counseling that was available, not just for child and parent, but also bringing that caregiver into it. Because a lot of times the parent is their child and they're having to come to terms with the choices that that particular child makes. I think Kelly is right in terms of it's hard to ask sometimes a caregiver to supervise a visitation. And caregivers sometimes don't want to be put in that role. I think it's real important, though, to make sure that the caregiver understands what the goal is. The worst cases that, I see are those where the kiddo ends up in a tug of war between the parent and the caregiver, because maybe, certain decisions wouldn't be the same, or somebody feels like their position is better, they can give more. And I think it really needs to be made clear at all points what the goals are, and really just do a lot of listening and uplifting, doing that with an emphasis on empathy and compassion, and realizing, I think, for all of us involved with these kinds of cases, that we were all not perfect parents 100% of the time. We all made our mistakes. And I think if you come at it from that perspective, it's really helpful. But again, I really think that helping the caregiver with the mental health aspects, they a lot of times end up with these kiddos in their care who have that trauma, who act out behaviorally in ways that they don't know how to deal with, or they don't have the financial ability to deal with. And they don't know what to do. And a lot of times that ends up maybe in an informal caregiver just kind of going, I can't do this anymore. Somebody else needs to take this child. And then in a formal placement, that placement breaking down. So I think if you come at it from that collaborative approach, it works a lot better.
Let's get down to the practicalities. Let me ask you both this question. From a judge's standpoint, what do you believe that would be beneficial to one, encourage more informal kinship? And how can judges help support the agencies to go down that path? And how can we support the actual child and the kinship giver in a reunification process? Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
That is a fantastic question because I not only see that from a navigator, but I also see it, like I said, I was a kinship placement. And I did have the judge ask me, what do you need? And at that time, I said, not a thing, which was an absolute lie because I needed all kinds of things, but I was terrified. I was terrified to say I needed help or I felt weak. And I think it's really kind of what Nicole has hit on a lot is building those relationships through the process of we're together. We're in this as a team effort on what is best for the child, and really supporting each other because I feel like when true relationships are built, and this is one of our techniques as navigators, is when we're building those relationships, trust is automatically built. And if I could trust people, that's when I would open up, right? I can remember as I learned how to trust my CASA worker, she came in and all she said to me was, "How are you?" And the waterwork started, and I just started crying. And I said, "I'm scared. I'm overwhelmed. I love this child. I don't know if I want to keep the child long term. I think I want him to go back to mom. I don't know how to do that." And that's when she said, "Was just take a deep breath and we're going to figure this out." So I think from our legal system, it's truly that support that 90% of our judges, I would even say 99% of our judges do offer, but it's building those relationships along the way, along the path. And the workers really making sure that that relationship is bridged because, as a kinship caregiver, how often was I in front of a judge? Once every few months. So it's knowing that I can trust those people. And I think the agencies such as the Kinship Navigator program that they're kind of the bridge to that trust, if that makes sense. Building that connection and letting them know that it's okay not to be okay. That
Thank you.
doesn't make you a negative person.
Thank you. Kelly, let me ask you, I'm not sorry, let me ask Nicole this. How can attorneys help bring and support the informal kinship and to make sure that those caregivers are supported in a legal proceeding?
Well, the informal kinship caregivers, in terms of a lot of times what they just need is the authorization. They need the decision-making ability. They're oftentimes they don't really want to go to court if they can help it. And so they just need somebody to explain to them how to get that, what that means for them. That can open doors to all kinds of resources. Not all kinds, because there's still fewer than there are in the formal system. But also, just I think communicating to the parents a lot of times as an informal caregiver, hey, I'm not trying necessarily to take your rights away. I'm just trying to do what's best for that kiddo. And here's how we can do that together. And a lot of times when I'm talking to kinship caregivers about how they should approach the parents, that's exactly what I say is, can you talk to them? Can you express to them that, hey, if you want that child to be with me and you want me to make decisions, you need to help me make that happen. You need to help me so that I can get medical care for this kiddo when I need it. I think a large part of it is education and training. And just more legal access and availability to legal resources as well as resources themselves. A lot of that is just knowing who to talk to. When you're talking about the formal cases where you're talking about in court, I think again, making sure that those decision-making authorities are there or that people understand what they can and can't make decisions for. I think making sure that the judges ask, how can I help you? Like Kelly said, what can I do to help maintain this placement? What can I do to help you as a whole understand how to get to an end goal that's best for this kiddo? Simply listening, doing those diligent searches and listening to the child and maybe the parent sometimes. If they don't want somebody to be a placement, it's important to know why. But a lot of it is just simply giving them a voice and making things available to them in terms of those resources from that beginning point.
Thank you. Kelly, what is one key takeaway that you would want the audience to know about the value and needs of kinship caregivers and promoting a kin first ideal?
The biggest takeaway to me for kinship services and kinship providers is the structure of family. Kinship providers are actually keeping those kids in the home with familiar faces, loved ones, less trauma, and I think that is huge. That's a big takeaway. A big takeaway I would love for people to hear is they deserve the support. I like to tell people as a kinship caregiver myself and as a navigator, when you go into foster care and you truly want to be a foster parent, a lot of times you've done your research to be that foster parent. You've done your research. You kind of know what it's going to take, what it entails, that you may not have that child in your home forever. I had 30 seconds to make that decision. I had a knee-jerk reaction to make that decision. And so I think it's important that, as Nicole has said many times, is that we protect, provide, and support everyone involved in the situation and really give them as many services, as much support, and as much knowledge and education as we possibly can.
Thank you. And Nicole, what would be your number one key takeaway about supporting kinship placement?
I'm with Kelly, just in that I think the number one takeaway is the communication aspect of it. Whether you're informal or you're formal, knowing what that process entails and knowing what the expectation is and actually feeling like they have a voice is a big thing, especially if you're in that formal system and you're being asked, hey, reunification is not going to work out. Now you have to decide whether or not you're going to keep this kiddo long term. That's probably something that should have been discussed way at the beginning. And I think sometimes that step gets skipped over. I would say increase, obviously, legal access and reduce the barriers to all of the resources, education and training for everybody who works with caregivers to know exactly what resources are available and how to go get those. And I heard from another organization something that I thought was really sort of a profound thought, and that is do no more harm. And I thought that's a really good way to look at it. It's very powerful to keep that in mind, is what you're trying to do is maintain this family in whatever form that takes. And instead of, not doing what it takes to form that and to maybe sabotage it instead.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. And I think it brings up the old adage, it takes a village to raise a family. And I think that's definitely sums up what the kinship program and placements can certainly do. Thank you both, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a few questions that have come in. And if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A so that you can get them answered. But one of the questions came in from a CASA volunteer who asks, as CASA volunteers, how can they better support kinship families?
Kelly, you want to take that? You want me to take it?
Sure. Well, I can take that one. Honestly, as a kinship caregiver at one time, and my CASA was my backbone. So thank you to the CASA workers out there. She is actually still actively involved in the kid's life today, and it's been 6 years. She to get that to be supportive is to, like I said in the beginning, the relationship. Her and I were able to build a relationship, and it's not that we had to go out for coffee every day, but when she came over, I could be transparent with her. And I could tell her, I'm tired. I'm tired. I have 2 little twins in my house and I'm exhausted because I'm too old for this. And she was there just to kind of pat me on the back and say, but you got this, like she was my cheerleader. And she was my therapist. So, and I would say that's the biggest part from a CASA worker is really genuinely building those relationships.
Nicole, do you have something else to offer on that point as well?
I would say for a CASA worker, be familiar with the resources that are available, and really ask that person, what is it that you need? What can I do for you? And I think don't come into that relationship with judgments that you may have about the parents or that you may have about the situation. Because again, I think it has to be remembered that the end goal of these cases at the very beginning is reunification. And you have to be there to be supportive. And to do that, you really need to have that education about what's available, how you can help facilitate those relationships and maintain what is there at that point.
Thank you. And this is more of a clarifying question for some of our viewers is, can you clarify what you mean when you say informal and informal caregivers?
Okay, so informal caregivers they may be a caregiver for a variety of different reasons. They're ones that are not, where the kids have not been removed and inside that formal CPS system. They may, be a caregiver because maybe one of the parents or both of the parents have died. Maybe one or both of the parents have just disappeared or gone to jail. So you don't have that actual, you're not in that actual court system. When you're a formal caregiver, you are actually part of that formal system in that you are a placement for a child. So the Department of Family and Protective Services, or CPS, they're the ones that actually have the temporary custody, and the kinship caregiver is they're in that formal system, and so they have access to benefits and resources and court oversight, unlike an informal caregiver who is not in that system.
And I would even kind of piggyback on that and say your FBSS cases, your family cases, and your safety plans, those are informal.
Okay. And here's another a question is, are there any organizations similar to ACH in the Harris County area?
Houston area, yes. There's DePelchin is down in Houston, another phenomenal kinship program.
That's great. And then what impediments do you feel deter kin placements from getting a license?
In my position, the ability to get licensed because they were not formally placed. So CPS may have done an investigation, but did not see the need to do a formal removal. So now the children are with this caregiver long term without that formal interaction or removal. So they don't have the legal stance to even try to get that formal license.
Well, and I think in a formal system, a lot of times it's things like, well, maybe they have prior CPS issues
Mhm.
that are like 15 or 20 years old, but that are still issues. And that's, some of where some of those legal access or resources can help. They may have old criminal history that maybe is not even relevant anymore. They may have financial problems getting, house repairs done.
Right.
I had a client when I was, well, she wasn't, I guess I was the ad litem for the kiddos, and the caregiver, because there was not going to be reunification, had a horrible time trying to meet those requirements because she just financially couldn't afford the repairs to the home. It's time consuming, it's intrusive. And I think that's another big thing is if all these people could get together for, hey, let's go visit, you know, at the same time, or let's do this, because it's a constant traipse in and out, appointments, in and out. And I think sometimes whether, it's intrusive, it's time consuming, and it's just overwhelming because you're dealing with multiple people and multiple systems. And it just can be financially difficult.
Right. And I can say, I know we had a grandmother who started as an informal placement. She had an apartment. She was getting 6 of her grandchildren at the time. Somewhere along the line, it turned into a formal placement where she could qualify for a kinship foster license, but her apartment was too small. So she could not get licensed because of the room restrictions. So I think that is exactly what, Nicole was talking about is she could be an informal placement, but as soon as we were talking about that foster placement, she no longer qualified because of the size of her apartment.
Yeah. And some of these issues, like Kelly's saying about housing, I've had caregivers that come that have issues because even though they may have an authorization, they don't have formal custody. And if you don't have formal custody, you can't, if you're living in federal housing, you can't get the kids on your lease. And so that's a big impediment as well. And that's where, like I said, a lot of these are just like you got the boulder at the top and it just starts running down the hill, and it just affects all kinds of things.
Do you have any advice for someone who's in the situation where they're an informal kinship placement and they're having barriers with getting those authorizations, and they're having even barriers to getting any kind of legal custody? What would be an advice for that?
I would say try to talk to me or someone like me or a kinship navigator who might be able to give you some suggestions. Grandparents Raising Grandkids is also a really great organization that people can go to. There's different chapters statewide. And there are ways to get authorizations by court order. There's ways to get medical help with a certain form. There's ways, there's different ways to get to an end goal. You just have to kind of know what they are. Custody is not something that's necessarily always going to be a first option, and may not be something that actually is easy to do. Um, and, a lot of that I think is just knowing what your options are. And if you can get to one of these people, or go to texaslaw.org, that's another big one. And find out what those options are, because there may be more than you think.
And there's another question came in that it wants to know if there's anything like ACH in Corpus Christi.
Corpus Christi. Ooh, I don't know if DePelchin touches Corpus Christi. I don't think they do. My number and email will be at the end of this. I am more than happy to do some research and see if there's anything like our program down there and give you that referral if I can find anything.
And are either you familiar with the Riverside Project in the Houston area?
I am
There was
not.
okay, about whether or not that was a resource.
No, but
Um,
if y'all have resources, please reach out to Kelly and I both because we'd love to add them to our lists.
and I want you just really quickly, before we end, tell us some of the exciting news that some exciting things that are happening within both of your organizations that I think everyone would be really happy about. Nicole.
Well, what I will say is it looks like our project is going to continue for at least another year, I believe. I hope. And so that's exciting. I'm glad to be able to say that. I think we're going to be doing some different things, which is really nice. And then also we're in the process of revising our Kincare guide. It used to be called the Kincare Primer, and we're in the process of revising that and making kind of updating it. And hopefully we'll have that available soon. And we really came at it from a place where we hope that it's user-friendly and really informative.
Kelly.
Amazing. With ACH Child and Family Services Kinship Navigator program, we are completely excited that we are going to continue and with the funding. And we have even now been able to push out into other counties. So we currently serve Tarrant County, Parker County, Palo Pinto, Johnson, and Hill. And we will now be moving out to Hood, Erath, and Somerville. And so I am excited to see this launch and take off in the next 5 years and hopefully continue to spread throughout the state of Texas and support these families.
Thank you. Thank you. That's going to bring us to the end of today's session. I want to sincerely thank Judge Logue for guiding our discussion, and of course to our panelists, Nicole Love and Kelly Elrod, for sharing such valuable insights with us. And now we're going to share some valuable information with you, which is their contact information. They have been gracious enough to allow us to share their information so that you can contact them if you need more information. And Nicole, if somebody wants to apply for your services, how do they do that?
They could go to that email, kincare@tlsc.org. They can go to Texas Legal Services Center's website. There's a form that someone can fill out on the website, or they can call that number there at extension 216, and it will go and that leaves a voicemail, and we'll put you in the list to contact and see what we can do.
Likewise, Kelly, you have been gracious and offered yourself up as a resource.
Absolutely.
Someone that can contact that has not only just a wealth of knowledge as a kinship navigator, but as someone who was a kinship provider as well. So we thank you so much to all of you. On behalf of the Children's Commission, we want to thank you, our viewers, for attending today's presentation. The State Bar has approved this course for 1 hour of MCLE credit. The course has also been approved by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization for 1 hour of certification and recertification credit for attorneys and paralegals in the areas of child welfare law and family law. Individuals who are watching the replay of this course may contact cctraining@txcourts.gov for MCLE self-reporting information. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation and that you will join us for our next webinar focused on representing deaf clients in child welfare cases. As a reminder, you may register for our live webinars and access the replay of this and all of the Commission's other MCLE webinar replays for free on our on-demand training and MCLE webpage. Once again, thank you for joining us for this presentation. Thank you to our panelists and Judge Logue. and have a wonderful rest of your day.